Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to have Jerome Corsi. Jerome is a journalist. He writes a lot, and he wrote a few books too. He received his PhD from Harvard University in political science in 1972 and has written many books and articles, including co-authoring with John O'Neill the #1 New York Times bestseller, Unfit for Command, the Swift-boat veterans speak out against John Kerry. If you remember that book when John Kerry was running, and Jerry Corsi had written that book with John O'Neill. So now you know what, Jerry Corsi is not the typical guest that we normally get here, which is basically someone to talk bad about George Bush. I don't know if he's going to do that or not, but from his writings and his articles, and I'm glad to have him here because it's a fresh opinion that I'm sure some of you will like. Now, Corsi's most recent book was authored with Michael Evans. The name of that book is Showdown with Nuclear Iran. We're going to talk to Jerry about Iran. He has a perspective on it that I think everyone needs to know. He co-authored Rebuilding America with Ohio gubernatorial candidate Ken Blackwell. Dr. Corsi's other recent books include Black Gold Stranglehold, The Myth of Scarcity and the Politics of Oil, which he co-authored with WND columnist Craig R. Smith, and Atomic Iran. Do we have Jerry with us?
Yes, I'm right here.
Great. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. Jerry, let's start with the election. Tell me your thoughts. Was it as you expected, not good enough, not bad enough? Tell me what your thoughts about the elections.
Well, I think it was about what I expected. I mean, the country, the United States, is tired of the Iraqi war. The country is ready for change. It's the midterm of the second Bush term, the 6th year of the presidency, and if you look back historically, in presidencies that have gone 2 terms, this election in the 6th year has always been very difficult, and the president in power, his party, has always lost congressional seats. So, I mean, I think it's pretty much expected, and I think the American people want a Democratic Congress with a Republican president because they're not happy with the way things are going. They want to see the Democrats can come up with something new, but they don't want too much change. This kind of creates a bit of a tension, maybe a stalemate, and we'll have to see how the next 2 years develop.
Okay. Do you think it wasn't, I mean, now the Democrats have both houses, the House and the Senate. Do you think it could have been worse? Because a lot of Republicans went back.
Yeah, well, I think it could have been worse. I mean, there could have been even more seats lost by the Republicans. This is a serious setback for the Republican Party. The Republican Party is going to have to regroup. I think it'll have to become more conservative. It had drifted from its conservative principles. President Bush has been acting and ruling more as a centrist than as a conservative, and I think that damages the Republican Party. When conservatives tend to be unhappy, the Republican Party suffers electoral defeats, and that's what's happened here. I think with regards to the Middle East, the American people don't see any progress or direction in the war with Iraq, and they're very concerned it's just going to degenerate into a civil war, and we'll, be in for a long conflict without a positive resolve. And that's something the president's going to have to address in the next few weeks.
Now, Jerry, what do you mean when you said that George Bush needs to be more conservative? You don't think he's conservative enough?
Well, no, I think, if you take a look at some of the decisions that George Bush has made, Supreme Court decisions like he had nominated Harriet Miers, who had been a friend of his back from the Texas Lottery Commission, when Republican conservatives had really wanted more of a moral conservative, someone who was opposed to abortion, someone who was more truly in favor of limited government. And Harriet Miers did not have that record. She didn't have any judicial record at all. She'd never really been a judge. And so that kind of decision was disappointing to conservatives, and conservatives began to question whether Bush was really truly with them. There were other decisions that were made. The battle on immigration, Bush's decision to favor a guest workers program and to essentially allow an amnesty for the millions of illegal immigrants in the United States who come across our border with Mexico. I think that was very damaging to Bush, with conservatives who wanted the border secured. And these types of decisions weakened Bush's support in the base, in the conservative base of the Republican Party, and I think it made an opening for the Democrats to gain moderate voters that they otherwise might not have gained.
Okay. Now, Jerry, it looks like they had everything planned. You know, last week George Bush said that Rumsfeld is going to be with him until the last day, but it looks like they really had it planned where if they lost the House and the Senate, or if they lost the House, then they're going to can Rumsfeld and bring Robert Gates, which is a complete shift in policy, which is like almost telling the Democrats, we're coming your way, so meet us halfway. How do you see Robert Gates' assignment with this?
Well, I agree with you. I think that the Gates nomination had been very carefully planned over the weekend prior to the election, and probably thought about before then. And Robert Gates has a history. I wrote about it today on WorldNetDaily.com. Robert Gates was with the CIA going back really to President George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush's father. And Gates has a history of working with the Council on Foreign Relations. I pointed to a task force report he co-authored with Zbigniew Brzezinski. And in this task force report, what Gates was arguing for was a policy of constructive engagement with Iran, which would mean that it is a shift of course that's coming, that so far the Bush administration has resisted direct negotiations with Iran unless Iran would stop enriching uranium. And Gates is on the record in this report of the Council on Foreign Relations with saying that we should directly engage in negotiations with Iran, even if they didn't stop enriching uranium. That's a very dramatic shift of policy, and I think it's coming. I think that that's probably the next step we'll see in the Bush attempt to deal with Iran.
So what are we, and also he brought in James Baker to
yes.
handle the Iraqi issue.
James Baker, who formed the study group on Iraq. James Baker, of course, was former Secretary of State under President Reagan. He's also very strongly Council on Foreign Relations. Also, Henry Kissinger has been coming to the White House and advising George Bush in the evenings, almost like a tutorial. He's been meeting on a regular basis with George Bush, President. And Kissinger is also Council on Foreign Relations. The entire Council on Foreign Relations approach to the Middle East has been more of a democratic approach. It's been in constructive engagement, negotiations, containment policy, but a containment policy through directly being involved with the various Islamic countries in an attempt to mold their policies to be more favorable to the United States or in our interests, including the interests of Israel. I'm not sure that it's going to be successful in the Middle East right now because of what I see in Iran is really a second revolution. I mean, with Ahmadinejad and the decision to, really have a more orthodox and extremely radical regime. Ahmadinejad believes in the Shiite doctrine that there's a Mahdi, the guided one, the 12th Imam, when 941 or some date such as that went down a well, the 12th grandson of the Prophet Muhammad. And the expectation is that it will take an apocalypse, but the Mahdi will come out of the well, and when he does, the Shiite vision of the true line of authority in Islam to the family of the Prophet will be reestablished, and Shiite Islam will triumph worldwide. Now, Ahmadinejad sincerely believes in this. He said this twice in his speeches to the United Nations. He's concluded both speeches by reference to the Mahdi. And, the United States is not going to engage Ahmadinejad to deviate from these beliefs or his pursuit of nuclear weapons, nuclear energy and nuclear weapons. simply because we're talking to him. Ahmadinejad will be happy to talk with the United States, but only on his terms, which do not include a stopping to the enrichment of uranium. That's why I see Gates and the attempt to move into this direction, which is a direction that Democratic presidents have tried before. Jimmy Carter tried it. Was tried also by Bill Clinton with Madeleine Albright's direction as Secretary of State to engage Iran in discussion. It has just not been a successful policy for us because we underestimate.
So, Jerry, what
Iran's driven.
Okay, what would you like to see? I mean, if not negotiation, you like to see war?
No, war I think would be the worst thing that could happen in the Middle East.
So, I mean, if you don't do negotiation, you don't do war, what's the third option?
Well, I've been favoring, in both of the books I've written, Atomic Iran and also in The Showdown with Nuclear Iran, I think there are expatriate Iranian groups around the world that have a lot of communication with the pro-democracy and the pro-freedom groups within Iran. I think Iran could undergo peaceful change and evolution because I don't see Iran as a monolithic, all-agreed-to society. You've got dissatisfied students. There's high unemployment in Iran. There's poverty. 65% of the people are poor. The mullahs have stolen a lot of the wealth of the country, including the oil revenue, made themselves millionaires and some of them even billionaires. I think that if we supported the Iranians around the world who knew how to work within their own country to support change within Iran, we could evolve the Ahmadinejad regime away from its extreme radical position. And that would be the way to go. That would be a much more favorable way to move policy.
Now, tell me, back in 1980s, we had Saddam Hussein to go to war with Iran so the revolution won't spread, and so we will not have the Shiites in the area be aligned with Iran. Now, in 2003, we go in there, we destroy Iraq, and we basically install a Shiite government that is aligned with Iran. And then with what is going on in Lebanon with Hezbollah, we are doing exactly what we feared that it would be done if Iran is successful in spreading the revolution. And Saddam was it was the first line of defense against Iran. Why did we go and destroy Iraq and destroy Saddam knowing that this is going to happen?
Well, I think the Bush family has almost feud with Saddam Hussein going back to the 1991 Gulf War. And President George W. Bush had Saddam in his sights, I think, pretty much from the beginning. I mean, Saddam Hussein, as you point out, Saddam Hussein himself was a Ba'athist. And the Ba'athist party dates ultimately back to the Mufti of Jerusalem. I mean, it basically has close associations with the Nazis and National Socialism back in Nazi Germany. The Ba'athist party, which is the only other Ba'athist group that's strong in the Middle East, as you know, is Syria, where the Assad is also a Ba'athist. And I'm sure that Ahmadinejad and the radicals in Iran viewed the 2003 invasion by the United States and the toppling of Saddam.
But Jerry, hold on a second. The Ba'athist party started back in the 50s.
Well, the Ba'athist party goes even further back than that. It goes back to the Mufti of Jerusalem. It goes back...
Not the Ba'athists, no, not the Ba'athists, because the Ba'athists started in the 50s with Michel Aflaq, who's a Lebanese, which was basically the idea of the Ba'athist is the Arab nationalism. Arab nationalism, that's all the Ba'athist party is. So they were not there when the Nazis were there.
Well, it comes from the same people who were aligned with the Nazis. I don't really want to argue the point because, if it has... It's an Arab nationalist movement is what it is. I agree with you on that.
Yes. But, no, I mean, just for historical facts. I mean,
it has ties back into the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, and it has ties back into the Mufti of Jerusalem. I mean, there are ties that go back into the National Socialism in Germany. It was a nationalist movement, every bit as much as National Socialism was a nationalist movement in Germany. But, I mean, that's going way back, and it's not the point I really want to make.
Okay.
The point I want to make is that Saddam Hussein, by toppling Saddam Hussein, you're right, the radicals in Iran did see that as that we won the 1980s war, as it were, for Iran. And the Shiites within Iran were able to identify now with the Shiites in Iraq and tie across, as you pointed out, to the Hezbollah in Lebanon, which was created in 1982 by Iran, and it brought Shiite Islam into Lebanon. So as you take a look at the Muslim world right now, what's gone on is that you've got an ascendancy of Shiite Islam that is being driven by Iran. And, it's unifying things that I didn't think could be unified. If you recall, in the 1980s, the Shiites in southern Iraq fought against the Shiites in Iran because, again, there's nationalistic ties. Remember, the Shiites in Iran are Persian. They speak Farsi, whereas the Shiites in Iraq are more Arabian, and they speak Arabic.
It's a mix, actually. It's you got both. You got Persian Shiites in Iraq, as well as you have Arab Shiites in Iraq and in Iran, in both. So you do have a mixture of both. That's why the Shiites themselves are divided in Iraq in Iraq itself.
And if you look at towns like Najaf, which is has a, going back to Ali, is the the burial place of Ali.
Right.
You've got very, very strong ties back into Iran. And so, you've got al-Sistani, for instance, who is Iranian he's Persian, but yet he speaks Arabic. He is, Iraqi, and he is a strong influence and has been a strong influence in Iraq. But then, Ayatollah Khomeini was in exile for a long time in Najaf, and that's where he met Fadlallah, who created Hezbollah.
Right.
Both of them were in exile simultaneously at the same time in Najaf. So Najaf and towns like Najaf are very, very strong Shiite holy cities to common across the Shiite world, whether it would be Iraqi or Iranian. But yet there are still nationalistic differences, language differences, culture differences. You can't assume that, as you know, that all of the Shiites are the same identical mindset and unity just because they share Shiite Islam. There are still significant differences among the Shiites.
Now, Jerry, explain something for me. Make me understand something. We went to Iraq, destroyed Saddam, while, common sense tells us that if we're going to have a confrontation with Iran, we needed to actually strengthen Saddam Hussein, strengthen Iraq, make Iraq even more stronger so he can be our first line of defense or offense, whichever way you want to look at it. It was not in the best interest of the United States to go and destroy our first line of defense by destroying Iraq and destroying Saddam. It seems like the sensible thing to do was to actually, because Saddam was our guy and he could have been our guy even until the last moment, but why did we go and destroy Iraq?
I do think it goes back again to the Bush family, like I explained earlier, I think.
So are you saying because of the Bush family we're destroying the United States?
Well, no, let me explain what my full thought is here. That Saddam Hussein goes back to being really a creation of the United States, going back, into the 70s or into the
that is true.
Before then. I've always thought that one of the reasons in the 1991 Gulf War that George H.W. Bush did not say on to Baghdad to Norman Schwarzkopf was because Saddam Hussein was our creation. The CIA had been for a long time supporting Saddam Hussein, even when George Bush was heading the CIA. And when you look at Iraq, Iraq has always seemed to me to be three distinct countries. You've got the Kurds in the northern part of Iraq, you've got the Sunni triangle, and you've got the Shiites in the southern part of Iraq. Now, it took the brutality of Saddam Hussein to kind of keep that country of Iraq together. Otherwise, it would have broken down into civil war, probably going back to the 70s. For us to go in and destroy Saddam Hussein, as we did in 2003, I think made inevitable the civil war which is occurring right now. And that civil war is only going to benefit, as you point out, Iran, because Iran sees benefit in supporting the Shiites in the southern part of Iran against the Sunnis. And, Iran has its own problem with the Kurds in the northern part of Iran, just like in the northern part of Iraq. So these are conflicts that are going to take, I think, decades more, generations more to resolve themselves. I don't think the American people have the understanding or should even be involved in how these conflicts resolve. I'd prefer to stay out of it, because I think it involves issues of religion, issues of culture, issues of nationality that most Americans do not have any experience of or understanding of. And they're very difficult to understand for Americans because it's such a different culture, different languages. I don't think we are going to be successful trying to sort out these kind of differences in the Middle East. And what we've done is we have unleashed Iran now into a position of increasing ascendancy, where Iran is going to be a major influence in Iraq, and Iran is going to continue to be a major influence in Lebanon with Hezbollah. I think Hezbollah is only going to increase its power. And Assad, I think, is going to continue to work with Iran as well. I don't think he'll go his own direction now. He'll continue to work with Iran, and Iran will supply Hezbollah through Syria, as it's been doing, including with rockets, as it's been doing for many years. So this Shiite ascendancy, I think we've unleashed. And I know that even the Saudis, the Egyptians, the other Sunni powers in the region are concerned about Iran, and should be, because if Iran were to successfully, as Ahmadinejad proclaims he wants to do, wipe Israel off the map and reduce the U.S. influence in the Middle East, Ahmadinejad is going to turn his sights next on Saudi Arabia and the Sunnis, because there's natural enmity there that has to be resolved over time.
So Jerry, what did we gain by going to Iraq? Anything?
Well, I think Iraq has been pretty much of a disaster all around. I mean, I'm not sure.
But we knew that before we went. I mean, anyone who took Politics 101 should have known that by going to Iraq we will not win. It's going to be a disaster, and everybody told us that. But we went in there anyhow. Who's the winner now in the Iraqi thing?
Well, I think first of all we should have known these issues, but I'm confident that the majority of Americans and the majority of even of the experts in the government did not fully appreciate the issues we've just worked through. I mean, the simple-minded kind of explanation of Saddam Hussein that the Bush administration presented and they were concerned about was this weapons of mass destruction, which proved not to be true. And they were projecting onto Saddam Hussein, all these concerns that Saddam Hussein was going to be radically anti-American, which I don't think he was. And
I don't think he was either.
I don't think he really was. Saddam Hussein, and I've written this before, I think Saddam Hussein played into some of these fears when he made the move to hold his oil revenue in euros. And I think that concerned the Bush administration. It concerned the Federal Reserve here, because we're very concerned that dollar holdings in foreign exchange currency be held in dollars with the deficits we're running. And I think Saddam Hussein played into these concerns and triggered the Bush administration fears. But looking at 9/11, looking at the attack on, the World Trade Center and on the Pentagon by Al-Qaeda, if you were going to say who did Al-Qaeda truly have ties to, Al-Qaeda had tighter ties at that time to Iran than it ever did to Saddam Hussein. And, Iran was working with Hezbollah. The muscle 9/11 terrorists came into the United States through Iran, with Hezbollah working with Al-Qaeda, and the money for the 9/11 terrorists came in through Dubai. Saddam Hussein wasn't involved in any of that equation. That's the truth.
Right.
And so I don't think we've accomplished anything. I think we've inflamed the entire Middle East by invading Iraq, and we're now seeing that played out. But
Jerry, we're not that stupid to go and do this. There was an objective, and somebody's objective has been met. Now, whose objective has been met by destroying Iraq?
Well, the people in the administration I've talked to, and I've talked to quite a few of them, and I know several of them pretty well, I think they did believe, and it was naive, but they did believe that we could establish a democracy, a structure of a constitution in Iraq that would be a model. I do think it's a naive idea, but George Bush, I think, sincerely believed it. And, a constitutional structure in Iraq is just so foreign to the culture that it doesn't make any sense.
But Jerry, hold on a second. What in the heck are we doing to go and apply constitutional whatever government by bringing democracy and freedom? They've been there for 35 years. We knew it. There's still a lot of dictators around the country. So this thing about spreading democracy is nonsense. I mean, we did not go there to sincerely spread democracy.
Yeah, I'm not saying it was right or that I agree with it. I'm just trying to...
No, but I mean, the President of the United States is not that... If he was naive, the people around him, which brings us to the people around him that designed the war and designed the destruction of Iraq, which is Richard Perle and Paul Wolfowitz and Douglas Feith, who actually concocted the thing about yellow cake and the Niger and the uranium with Iraq and all this stuff. So these guys are the ones who designed the destruction of Iraq for a purpose, and none of them are here to even answer for it. What can you tell me about these three and their design of the Iraq War?
I think Richard Perle, Douglas Feith, and the others you've mentioned did truly believe that we could have this democracy process work. I think they did. I think it was naive. I don't think it's got a chance of working. But I don't think they did it for some, I don't think they did it for the oil.
You don't think they did it for Israel?
I think, the whole argument's been made that because Richard Perle's a Jew and because Feith's a Jew, they were really trying to assist Israel.
And Paul Wolfowitz is a Jew, too.
They're all Jews. I just don't, I know these individuals quite well, and I know they are strongly for Israel, but I don't see how this plan could advance the goals of Israel unless they sincerely also believed that this democracy idea would work in Iraq. Otherwise, all they've done is unleash Iran, and I don't think they wanted to do that either.
Exactly.
I don't think their plans. I don't think any of the plans that led up to the invasion of Iraq by the variety of people that were involved in it either had a conspiracy theory behind it to assist assist Israel, because it didn't work to assist Israel. All it's done is put Israel in greater danger.
Okay.
Israel today is in greater danger than it's ever been in.
Okay, Jerry, we have some people waiting on the phones. We're going to go to the phones with Oday on line 2. Go ahead, Oday.
On?
Yes, go ahead. You're on.
I wanted to know if you think that when they invaded Iraq, that they thought that they could actually go right through to Syria and Iran and everything, and they got stuck there. So that's the reason why they can't get any further.
Okay.
That's a good question. It's a possibility.
And,
if you look at
like the way you guys are talking, it's just propaganda like that. Everybody should be like the U.S. Well, maybe Iran is right, and everybody should be like Iran.
Okay. Very good. Let's hear Jerry.
Well, first of all, I don't think that an American-style democracy is necessarily the appropriate model for every country in the world. I don't believe that. And I don't think we as Americans can determine what should be the appropriate structure of government for Iran or Iraq or any of these other countries that we're talking about. So I disagree with that. I don't think that, we're going to necessarily find a match for a U.S.-style constitutional democracy in a country like Iraq or Iran. In terms of the idea that we would go through Iraq and then invade Syria and Iran, if you look at the Bush doctrine about preemptive wars going back to 2002, I think the Bush administration could have overestimated our military ability and could have been thinking something of that nature. But today, that's completely off the question. I don't think today that there would be the political support in the United States or the political will for another war, an expanded war in the Middle East. I think the United States politics today are to withdraw from Iraq And the direction it's going to go is in that direction, to be less involved in Iraq, not more.
Okay. Let's go back to the phones with Jeff on 3. Go ahead, Jeff.
My friend, can we get anybody in the Democratic Party that leads to impeach George Bush? The young lady that's supposed to be the first woman to be the Speaker of the House of the House of Congress. Can we all demonstrate on Lafayette Street?
Okay.
The federal bill to demonstrate that we need to impeach George Bush.
Okay.
That's my comment.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. Jerry, you think we're going to see an impeachment coming through?
I wouldn't be surprised. I think the Democrats will begin investigations. I'm not sure what basis they'll use for the investigations. That's still very formative, but I think they'll start investigations in Congress of the Bush administration on several fronts.
Now, being naive or an idiot, that is not a defense, huh?
What's that? No. I think they'll start out with looking at the defense appropriations that were made and tracking expenses that went to Halliburton and other defense contractors, and they'll start there to see if all the rules were followed. They'll start on technical grounds. I don't think they'll be able to begin an impeachment proceeding on a grand theory, arguing, for instance, that Bush was lying about weapons of mass destruction. I don't think that would get anywhere. I think they'll start more technically, and then if they can establish some of these technical issues, they'll see if they can expand it to be an impeachment proceeding. And I'm sure there'll be investigations both against George Bush and also against Dick Cheney, maybe on separate grounds. They may look at Cheney more on the oil policy and the meetings Cheney's held with oil executives that have not been public. They may start investigating there. But I'm sure the Democratic Congress is going to move in that direction.
Okay. Very good. Let's go back to the phones with Freedom. Go ahead, Freedom.
Yes, I would like to take Mr. Corsi on because he's one of the guys, Dr. Tillawi, in 2004 who swift voted John Kerry, as you remember, and he was in full support of the Bush administration at a time, Mr. Corsi, when there was less than 1,000 Americans dead in Iraq. Now there's 2,838 Americans dead, American men and women, soldiers. Now I want to ask you a question.
Well, wait a minute. I'm going to answer that one first. Sir, let me answer that one. Let me answer that one first.
President, do you think that we would have redeployed by now? And do you feel personally responsible for the deaths of over 1,800 Americans since you swift voted John Kerry? I want you to finally answer this. And thanks very much.
All right.
Is he finished?
Yes, go ahead.
A minute ago. First of all, he's incorrectly premised. The support, the swift votes, and swift votes had only to do with opposition to John Kerry. The swift votes were never agreed on the support of George Bush. And if he wants to make an argument that the swift vote campaign was directed by or supported by the Bush White House, he's just flat wrong. It was not. There was no unity among the swift vote vets to support George Bush. It was only against John Kerry, and the argument dealt with Vietnam and John Kerry's war record in Vietnam and his opposition to the war in the 1970s when he came home from the war. It had nothing to do with Iraq, and it had nothing to do with supporting George Bush. Now, he's either going to believe that or not, and I don't care. That's the truth.
Okay.
Now, asking me about being personally responsible, the swift votes were not motivated to support the Iraq war, and that's, again, just false and not correct.
Okay. Jerry, if you are to write a new book with about the same title, The Unfit for Command, but the second line will be George Bush in the White House, you think you could write one?
Well, I've been very critical of George Bush. You haven't read everything I've been writing. For 2 years, I've been critical of George Bush. That's why it always amuses
me. So he is unfit for command.
Excuse me, sir. That's why it always amuses me when people like your last caller presume that I'm an unqualified supporter of George Bush. It's just not the case.
Okay. Very good. Eugene on 2. Go ahead, Eugene. Eugene, you're on. Go ahead.
Yes. Questions to Dr. Corsi. I was just wondering what part of Death to America don't I understand as a citizen of Louisiana?
And it was.
I'm just not hearing this question at all.
Iraq, if he looks at the big picture, we now have troops and airfields in Afghanistan and Iraq, and not just if you look from both
So what's your question, Eugene?
Next threat.
Eugene, what's your question?
Well, when Bush first started the war on terror happened, he said it was going to be fought in many countries and on many fronts. And I'm just wondering what part of death to America don't we understand?
Okay. Jerry?
I don't understand the question.
Okay. He said what part of death to America, I guess, you know, when demonstrators in Iran, they would chant death to America. And he's saying that George Bush said that we will be fighting the war on terror or the war on terrorism in many countries. So which part of death to America, I'm assuming he's referring to what demonstrators chant, death to America, that you don't understand?
Well, I think, you know, it's clear when Ahmadinejad and the radicals in Iran do chant death to America, death to Israel, or Ahmadinejad gives a speech and says that Israel needs to be wiped from the map or the Holocaust didn't happen. These are strong statements from a head of state that are threatening, and I think we all understand them. Now, it doesn't mean that we're going to solve those problems by going to war with Iran. As I stated earlier, I think war would be the worst thing we could do with Iran. I think we need to engage in taking steps and working to support forces within Iran. I also disagree that the regime of Ahmadinejad is universally supported within Iran. There's thousands of people in prison right now in Iran, from universities, poets, intellectuals, internet bloggers, who are imprisoned in Iran because they disagree with the regime. It's been a very brutal regime. It's been very brutal to its own people. And I think that the force of positive change in Iran would be for the Iranian people themselves around the world and within Iran to begin movements to increase freedom within Iran. And I think before Ahmadinejad, certainly the presidencies of Khatami and Rafsanjani were much more open to internal dissent within Iran than is the current case today. Iran's moved back to a much more rigid position the same way it was when Ayatollah Khomeini was in power. But I don't think America is going to be the one that's going to solve that problem. I think that's a problem that's going to be solved by the Iranian people themselves, including the expatriates around the world.
Okay. Who the heck are we fighting, Jerry? What is this war on terrorism? Do we even know what this war on terrorism is all about?
I don't think, the United States has had a very clear definition of that, to be honest with you, because I don't think the vast majority of Americans, including many policymakers in the government, have clearly understood the complexity of the forces in the Middle East, and I still think we don't understand them entirely. The issues that are, we can't even look at the entire Islamic world as supporting Ahmadinejad or Iran. As I pointed out earlier, I think there's strong differences with Saudi Arabia and Iran, Egypt and Iran. I don't think Jordan's in agreement with Iran. There's concerns by many countries about where Iran is heading. And to continue to launch wars, I think, are really a failure of foreign policy, not a success. If there's going to be any wars like Iraq, I was in favor initially of getting out as quickly as possible, because I think the longer we stay, the more complex and more difficult the situation is, and the worse it is. Right now, we're isolated into compounds. We're into military bases that are vulnerable to attack, dangerous for the Americans there, and we have zero impact or control on the countryside, which we've largely abandoned to various militias, terrorists, insurgents, and the country of Iraq right now is in a state of civil war and heading towards chaos every day. I don't think we're going to be able to solve that problem militarily.
So, Jerry, we only have about 3 minutes left. Tell me two questions. What is next? What are we going to do next? And what is the best thing to do, and how are we going to do it?
Well, I think the next thing we're going to do, I mean, whether it's the best or not, the next thing we're going to do is, now that the Democrats have control of Congress and that Gates is headed towards being Secretary of Defense, I think the United States is going to take a look at this, constructive engagement as dealing with Iran. I'm not sure that'll solve anything either. The Iranians may just take that as an affirmation that they've won. They may not constructively engage in discussion unless we agree to make a variety of concessions that the Bush administration probably won't make. I don't think you're going to solve the problem with Iran simply by negotiations. I think
forget about Iran. Iraq. What can we do with Iraq?
Well, I think Iraq, the direction of that policy is going to be towards a pullout. I don't think that's going to. I think the Bush administration will have to set schedules, and will have to begin pulling out. And I think the end result will be the country will be in civil war. I don't see any power or authority that will be able to keep a lid on the Kurds versus the Sunnis versus the Shiites in Iraq. And, that country is headed towards civil war, and it might split into three countries. And Iran will certainly have a major influence, especially with the Shiites in southern Iraq.
Okay. So
I foresee that we'll pull out militarily with Iraq, and I foresee the region will descend into further chaos. And I don't think our presence there has been positive, and I don't think our military invasion into Iraq was successful.
So what Colin Powell told the president, that if you break it, you will own it. Do you see us owning it for the next 20 years or so?
No, I don't think it's a good idea to own it. I think we need to get out of there and admit we have not succeeded. And I think the situation will be, more chaotic because we went in. Saddam Hussein, for all of his brutality, at least kept the lid on the country. I'm not sure Saddam Hussein was a good solution either for Iraq. I mean, certainly, you can look to the Kurds or you can look to the Shiites in Iraq, and they actively opposed Saddam Hussein while he was in power. Iraq is going to be a very, very difficult country for anybody to deal with.
So probably the best solution is to get Saddam Hussein out of jail and install him as the president of Iraq.
Well, he'd probably go for that. I don't know that will help anything. If he got back, you might have a situation like Cambodia, where Saddam Hussein took on to kill, thousands or more people, the same way that happened in Cambodia when the lid was taken off of those powers. I'm not sure putting Saddam Hussein's back in power is a solution either. Okay.
Jerry, just have time to say thank you, sir, for coming on the program. It has been a pleasure having you.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity and the discussion, and I wish I had clear solutions to this. I just want to conclude by saying I am not in favor of more war led by the United States. I think more war in the Middle East would be a disaster, and I'm hoping the administration will not engage in any more wars in the Middle East.
Thank you, sir.
I've written 2 books now with that theme.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we only have 1 minute to go. We'll be back in the second hour with Layla El-Haddad. She's a journalist who lives in Gaza. As some of you know, that there was some trouble there in Gaza. So we'll be talking about Gaza in the next hour with Layla El-Haddad, someone who writes, she has a blog on the internet, and we will be talking to her in the second hour. But to tell you the truth, Jerry probably had a lot of inside information. He's more educated than probably the average Joe out there. He had some good stuff, some good comments to make, and I disagree with him on a couple of them. But that's why we bring him to you, and you decide. We will be back in 5 minutes. See you then.
The Susan G. Komen